Sticky conversations. We've all had them. We all have avoided them. And sometimes they still get the best of us. During this session, we're going to talk about sticky conversations and one simple hack that might make those conversations less sticky. I'm Sharon Justice, and over the next few minutes, I will be presenting some thoughts and some tactics and maybe a few takeaways that will help your next conversations not be quite as difficult or quite as sticky. I am with Justice Leadership, a consulting firm that provides human resources based consulting support. I teach at East Carolina University in our leadership development and HR program, and I'm also a faculty member with the Executive Farm Management Program, a collaborative between NC State, East Carolina University, Clemson, and the University of Georgia. So let's just jump right in and find out how we can make our conversations a little less sticky. So let's first take a minute and focus on just communication basics. We have two people or more that we need to converse with. Somebody sends a message and somebody is supposed to receive that message. But, things get in the way and it's interference. Now, the way that we try to communicate that message also can lend itself to causing some of that interference. So think about as you communicate, we have face-to-face communication, like here, our picture, but there still is something that gets in the way. But in today's environment, we're communicating by text message, by email, by sticky notes left on a desk somewhere. Sometimes we're not using words, we're only communicating through body language or a cold shoulder or just an avoidance. So there's all types of ways that we communicate. But we all individually have a message that we need to convey. That person that we're talking to needs to receive that message. They're sending us messages the entire time through their body language, their eye contact, or their avoidance of responding to a text message or an email. And the method that we use is called our channel. So let's think a little bit more about our messages. You, again, have a message. That receiver needs to receive it, but there is noise. So that interference really is noise that gets in the way of the message. So as you are thinking through, I'm going to ask you for, in just a minute, to identify the things in your environment that get in the way. What things cause noise? In other words, what are the obstacles that you need to overcome in order to communicate your message? So take a few seconds and jot down several things that can get in the way of your communication in your workplace, with your family, with friends and colleagues at a social organization. It doesn't matter what environment we're in. So what gets in the way? Maybe you want to think about that one person that you're having trouble connecting with, or that always seems to end in a tough or difficult conversation, and jot down a few things that are getting in the way. So what kind of things did you come up with? Things that I think about are from all spectrum, all environment. So let's take a look at what some of the communication obstacles are that you might have on your list. So your list may look a lot like mine. I find that technology is a big obstacle in how we communicate, how our messages are sent and received. So whether it is through text or email, the technology itself, or if I'm standing in the presence with somebody and that phone is in their hand and it's either buzzing or they're looking at it, they're not fully focused on me and our conversation and our message. So being present with the person in front of you is really important. So tuck the phone away, put it in your back pocket, and that technology extends to the watches on our wrist or anything else that we are carrying around with us. That Apple Watch or that Garmin that has messages flash up and you take a look at it really gets in the way of our attention, so trying to focus. Emotions also get in the way of our messages. If we get angry, if we get frustrated, if we are super excited, people can just not be in the same plane that we are or the same realm with our emotion. Previous encounters can impact how we are received. If you've got history with this particular individual, then that history rolls over into our current encounters. Why else is it that if you've got teenagers in your life, if you send them a text message that says, call me, they might roll their eyes and think, what is she angry about now? Or what have I done? When all I'm like is just call me. But that previous encounter, that relationship history can influence and often does influence how we communicate with each other. In our environments, the language that we use, whether it's English as a first or second language, or maybe interacting in your workplaces with those that don't speak English as a first language, it can be very difficult to convey messages without just the basic words and without the nuances. Cultural differences, the way that people interact between genders or cultural influences, again, can make it very difficult for our messages to be heard for what we're trying to say. The other things are getting in the way and they're influencing our messages. And then there's just distractions. Beyond just the technology and the phone in the pocket, if you're in an office environment and there is a lot of things going on in that particular environment, the phone is ringing, there's papers on the desk, there's people walking by, constantly trying to get attention, and you're trying to grab 2 or 3 minutes to have a serious conversation. That's not conducive. Same thing happens if you're working outside with employees and there is heavy equipment or there's a lot going on and their attention is divided. It's going to be really hard to have that conversation. What else did you come up with? Think about those things that already get in the way of your messages, and what we're trying to do when we go into these sticky conversations is be aware of all of these outside influences and these distractions and try to set ourselves up for the best environment first. Not try to have a sticky conversation in between walking from one place to the other when there's only about 30 seconds and you know that you're going to need 30 minutes. That's not setting yourself up for success. So planning it and being mindful of that environment and those distractions you have to do first before you can move on and actually have a productive conversation. So what makes a conversation sticky? Why is it that sometimes you can have a conversation and it doesn't get into that sticky or difficult zone, and other times it does? Well, it all has to do with the conversation itself and what the subject is. When the outcomes are really important, then that means you have an affinity or an attachment to it. When the viewpoints are different, meaning there are opposing thoughts and viewpoints, that can make conversations sticky. And then, of course, emotions tend to run high. When we care about something and when there's a difference of opinion, our emotions start to get involved and things can escalate quickly and a conversation becomes sticky. That's what makes our preparation and our thought process going into it so important, so that these things don't get the best of us. The first thing that we need to be aware of is that our words matter, and we want to avoid judgmental language. We want to avoid global language. We want to avoid stereotypical, lengthy, or complicated language. Now, let me give you a few examples. Judgmental language is "you always do it that way," or "what were you thinking?" We all do it, especially when we are working with family or family-owned business, or those that maybe we have been around for a long time. Global language is "what are you people thinking?" or "your generation," or "you girls," or "you guys," or anything that is global or big. So you're using language like all, or everyone, or all the time. "You're always late" is global. "Can't you show up on time" is judgmental. Stereotypical language can be those phrases that incorporate a couple, like, "well, your generation won't never understand," or "you're too young to get it," or "you're too old to get it." So stereotypical language, or "what would you know about that? You didn't grow up in this business or this industry." Again, stereotypical. Language that gets really lengthy and complicated can cause people just to glaze over and tune out. So when we are thinking about having sticky conversations and having that difficult conversation, we want to get straight to the point, and look on the left side, the yeses, and we want to be real brief and real simple. So you don't want to have a laundry list of 12 things that you're talking about. You want to just talk about the main thing. So get one point, brief, simple language. Now let's go back, and how do we counteract judgmental language? We use language that is just very descriptive and fact-based. It's focused and specific. So again, instead of saying "you're always late," you are saying "I noticed you were late the past 3 Mondays." So that is focused, and it's specific, and it's descriptive. So whenever you are framing up your conversation and how you want to begin to have this difficult or sticky conversation, keep this list of reminders in front of you. So we want to use the lesses, the yes side, the descriptive, focused, specific, brief, and simple language to frame up our conversation. So let's see if we can identify what type of language this is. Your generation is never going to understand how all this technology works. So if you look back or think through those things that we just talked about, what describes this statement? Is it that yes side, or is it that red mark no side? Well, as I look at this statement, it's a little global. Your generation, stereotypical is that generation all. Judgmental, you're never going to understand. So you see our words can get wrapped up. And then how all this technology work, again, is stereotypical. So you want to avoid making just these very generalized statements. Somehow in our past, we got this idea that if we're general, we are less confrontational, or we're less hurtful. But I think it does just the opposite. Remember, clarity is kind, according to author Brene Brown. So being very clear, very specific, helps people to hone in exactly what it is that you're talking about. You know, if I make that previous statement in front of my elder family members, I might be faced with an angry grandpa, because that doesn't feel very good. It feels like an attack. It feels like it will put anybody on the defensive if you are hit with that previous statement. Your generation is never going to understand all of this technology and how it works. So to avoid the angry grandpa or the angry boss or the angry coworker, remember to eliminate those words that are judgmental, global, stereotypical, lengthy, and complicated. And trust me, it can be harder to do than it sounds. So we're going to practice a little bit about how do we get this language out of our conversations. We are really trying to avoid resistance. So when you think of a brick wall and running into a brick wall, that is resistance. So when you use that language like your generation is never going to understand all of this technology, what you're doing is you are erecting a brick wall and you are just asking for resistance. And resistance is a natural response. It's what we do when we feel like we've done something wrong, we're being attacked. We literally put our arms up and try to push off that, but wait a minute. And so what you're trying to do is eliminate that resistance. That resistance is predictable, it's natural, but it isn't always necessary. So if we could eliminate the original resistance to our words and the language that we use, how much more effective might we be? And how might we not have these difficult, sticky conversations get the best of us? That's our goal. Now, there is one simple change that I mentioned right at the very beginning of this program, and it is using I statements. An I statement is the magic bullet, so to speak, to diffuse these difficult, sticky conversations. So we're trying to eliminate the resistance. We're trying to have a productive conversation, and we don't want to start off on the wrong way. And I know we've all done it. I've done it. I start out and immediately I can sense that somebody is just getting prickly, and they're standing up taller, or their back is getting a little straighter, or they're taking a step back, or they are in their body language almost like they're putting their arms up in front of me and pushing me back. That's what we want to avoid. And when we use the tactic of an I statement, it can help us break down and not immediately get to that resistance. And the way that you use an I statement is you stick to the facts. Remember our little chart? So you want to be brief and you want to be focused and specific. Don't overgeneralize. Start from your perspective rather than attacking. And then state the implications of the behavior. So you're describing why it matters and how it affects other people or the environment or the business. So let's dig a little deeper. So if I started with this statement with an employee that is coming into the office and I say, you are late every time we set up an appointment to meet. This is going to have the exact opposite desired effect of what I'm looking for. It's immediately going to put my coworker or my subordinate on the defensive. No, I'm not. I'm not late for every appointment. Well, that every appointment is that global, not specific language. But the other piece that really is a trigger is I start with you instead of how it's affecting me and my coworkers. You are late. As soon as I say you, I'm taking my finger and I'm pointing at them, maybe even two fingers, double-barreled pointed at them. And immediately that causes the resistance. That's what we're trying to avoid. So if we use the I statement principle and flip it around, start with I and the implication of this behavior. I'm finding it really hard to commit to our meetings when you've been at least 30 minutes late the last 2 times. So it's my perspective, it's the impact on me, it's very specific and very focused, and I've got the information of the 30 minutes late the last 2 meetings. And so the implication is that I find it hard to commit. And the behavior is very specific. Now, what happens is because you've got fact, and because you're very specific, this is hard to argue with. So the person can't say, I haven't. Well, yes, you have. I've got the documentation right here, or I've got the notice, or whatever you have to back it up. And then when you're not starting with you, you're starting with the fact and the situation. Again, it diffuses it. You can then have a conversation that is much more productive. Is the meeting time inconvenient? What's going on that's keeping you from here? Is there something that I need to know about? You're not letting them off the hook for their behavior, but you're giving them an opportunity to engage in the conversation. Maybe it is their kids' daycare has just changed, or their partner's work schedule changed, and so now they're having to do morning carpool duty or afternoon carpool duty. You don't know, and it doesn't. Whatever the situation, you just want to be able to talk about it and let the person have a say-so, not make excuses, but realize that their lack of being on time is causing bigger issues, is causing problems. And then you get to the point, this just can't happen anymore. You're late to work, then Sue can't leave or can't go to lunch, or we can't get our work done. Whatever the case is, you're able to then move it into a productive conversation about what's wrong, why it's wrong, what needs to change about it, and what they're going to do about it. That's what the piece is by switching it from you are late to I have noticed, or I have a hard time committing when you're late, or I've noticed that you haven't been here the last 2 meetings. So starting it from that I perspective can diffuse that natural resistance. So let's go back to this original statement. Your generation is never going to understand. How can you change this to an I statement and not be stereotypical, judgmental, global? So take a minute and reframe this, jot it down in front of you, and see if you can come up with a better way to start this conversation. I'll give you a few seconds. So what'd you come up with? So I put an example. I find it difficult to explain how social media can help when you say how foolish it is. That's a little better. So again, it's still direct and to the point, and it still may not be a very easy or comfortable conversation, but at least there's not the attack. Now you have positioned it that there's a problem and they're contributing to the problem, and it's what are we going to do about it? So I want you to practice actually writing out how you might phrase each one of these scenarios. They may be things that you are facing in your workplace, some simple things that seem to recur over and over and over and that can cause stress between our work family. Sometimes our work family is our real family. So I really want you to practice. So pull out the handout that came with this program, and I am going to give you time to work through each one of the statements and actually write how you might start writing, having this conversation and practice it. And if you're in a place where you can read it out loud or say it out loud, then flip it and actually verbalize it. Sometimes we write things, but then we're not able to actually put our words out in the open when we're thinking about having a conversation. So role play with yourself for a minute. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. There'll be some silence as I'm giving you time. And then I will let you know when we're wrapping up, and then we'll walk through some examples of how you could flip this into an I statement instead of a you statement. So take a couple of minutes now and actually jot down your answers. right, keep working. Don't get distracted. All right, keep at it. I'll give you about 30 more seconds, or you may pause it if you need more time. All right, we're going to wrap it up here, but if you need more time, hit pause. Keep working through them, and I'm going to take us through example by example how you might turn this into an I statement. So let's talk about a few of these and see if we can flip them to I statements. I bet you've all encountered at least one of these scenarios, if not multiple of them. The first one is some space being really messy, whether it's your office, your work vehicle, whatever it might be. So here's a way. Instead of saying your office is really messy, you might want to flip. I've noticed it takes you time to find things in your office. I'd be glad to help you with some organization tips and share what's worked for me. And then you go into the conversation to offer why that might make a difference. Um, how much time could you save? Maybe the guests are coming in to visit, and this isn't a good representation of how you want the office kept. I mean, there could be lots of reasons why you want a space that's kept neater or cleaner, or boxes not stacked in the hallway, or papers not stacked. So whatever your situation is, just I've noticed it takes you a lot of time, or I've noticed that things get dropped right by the door, or again, what the impact is. If a messy office doesn't bother anybody else and the person is still functioning, then it may or may not be something you need to address. So again, you're thinking through, is there an impact on somebody else, and how do I need to address it? And that then becomes something that you can tackle. So whatever it is, whether it's messiness or some behavior or some implication that affects somebody else, that's when we use an I statement. Now this one crops up more than you might think. And being in the role of HR, it seemed that nobody wanted to address it. And these are the things that would land on my desk or in my office. And just dropping a bag of deodorant or mouthwash or soap on somebody's desk or office space isn't kind, and that does more harm than good. So again, sometimes these personal issues become a place that you need to address it. So we'll practice with this one. And what I have always done with these very personal, privacy invading kind of conversations is just frame it into the way that I would want somebody to tell me. So I'm going to tell you. And that generally helps to take some of the sting out of it. So I'd want somebody to tell me this, so I'm sharing it with you. After time outside in the hot sun, you have a really strong odor. Let me know if there's suggestions or anything I can do to help. But I wanted you to know. And so then you let the person just take and run with it. Or if it doesn't get better, then you have to address it. But you know, whether it is strong perfume or body odor or whatever the case is. Sometimes these are the most difficult conversations that we let go for a long time. Here's another one that seems to crop up pretty regularly. You didn't do that right, even after I've told you 3 times. We get frustrated. Somebody ought to be able to do this job after I've told them. Maybe the instructions weren't clear. Maybe they weren't listening or distracting. Who knows what the situation is, but you've got to address it. So rather than starting with that you, and immediately you know you're going to get defensive reactions, I know you're working hard at doing that task the right way. I see you're still struggling. What can I do to help you understand it better? Trying a different tactic. Maybe they don't recognize that they're not doing it the right way. Well, I thought this is what you showed me, or I thought this is what I understood, so you can get to productive conversation without pointing those fingers. This is one that seems to crop up and cause all of us some issues when somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do. We get emotional, we get frustrated, and usually this is when our filters slip, so to speak, and we come barrels blazing with, you didn't do your part. I just encourage you to flip it around and try something like this. I got left holding the bag last night when you didn't do what you promised. When you don't deliver on your promises, it affects the rest of us. And then you explain how it affects. Now, what will you do differently, or how can I count on you to get the things done that you promised? So you move then into that productive conversation and the commitment of what that person needs to do differently going forward. And conflict and sticky conversations don't just happen in the workplace. They happen around the people that we live with and those that we care about the most. So whether it is you tracked in dirt, or you didn't do the dishes, or you left the dirty towel in the floor, I encourage you to also practice these principles with those that you are living with. So rather than you tracked in dirt, flip it. What have you done to address this in the past? I put the shoe bin by the back door to help us all remember to take muddy shoes off before coming inside. Sweeping up tracked in dirt multiple times a day is frustrating. And I've tied it to your shoes. Have a little humor, but again, whatever that personal situation is what happens, why it's important, and what the impact is on others. In general, we don't wake up in the morning intending to irritate those that we live and work with. Most of us don't. But when we frame it in the I rather than the you, that helps us get it to a place where we can actually have some productive conversation. All right, here's the last one. That report you wrote was terrible. So somebody didn't live up to your expectations, and whatever that task is. So this one I just used, the report you wrote was terrible. Does that do anything at all? Does it help? No. Often though, I hear us just make these blanket statements that don't do anything to resolve the issue. So let's flip it again and let's do an I statement. I did read the report you turned in yesterday, but it wasn't your best work, nor was it what I expect from you. What do you need from me to do your best work? Or what is it that you don't understand about what I'm looking for? What is getting in the way of you turning in error-free work? So again, you are framing it with the I, and then giving the implications of it, and then maybe asking a question. So hopefully these will give you some frame and some sort of practice to begin reshaping the language that we use to start these sticky conversations and maybe keep them out of that danger zone, that resistance conflict zone. So let's review a little bit of the I statement magic. The big thing is you are starting with I and not you. And then you're using language that is descriptive, focused, and specific. If they've been late 3 times, then say, I've noticed you've been late 3 times, not you're always late. So you're staying out of that judgmental, global, stereotypical, general language. You are keeping your observations and your comments brief, and you're being simple. Now is not the time when you're starting that sticky conversation, that difficult conversation, you're bringing something up. It's not the time to air every bit of dirty laundry and to share every single example of why they irritate you or they're not performing. Start with one thing at a time. So stick to the facts, keep it focused, and don't attack that you are giving 12 examples of why they're not living up to your expectations or why this is a problem. And state the implications, why this matters. If it's just because you don't like that they wear a certain shirt and it doesn't really matter, then leave it alone. But if there is a reason that you need to have this conversation and there are implications on others, there's implications on teamwork or the brand or the health of the business or the relationships, then you need to state it. When we as humans recognize that we are impacting others negatively around us, in general, that will help us change behavior. Not always, but in general it helps us because we don't necessarily want to offend others, to be a problem to others, and we don't want to cause issues. So our general human nature is generally wired that way. I'm not saying that that is always the case, but when we can get our language that is less attacking and we show what the implications of that behavior is, then we can move forward and find common ground and paths to work together. Conversations can be sticky. Whenever we are working with other people, we are going to encounter situations that require us to talk about things that are uncomfortable, that could lead to conflict, that become sticky. And again, sticky conversations happen because outcomes matter, viewpoints are different, and at times our emotions can run high. So as you think through the things that we have talked about today, what are 2 things that you have been reminded of or maybe heard for the first time and that you will commit to trying going forward whenever you're faced with a sticky conversation? What are 2 things? Jot them down so you don't forget. I've enjoyed presenting the content, and I've seen the magic of I statements and how they can work to build better relationships and to make conversations less sticky, conversations less different. If you want more, join me as a part of the Executive Farm Management faculty. The Executive Farm Management program, again, is a collaborative between 4 universities, NC State, ECU, Clemson, and the University of Georgia. And we focus on bringing practical skills to the farm operation. Specifically, we focus on multi-generational large family farm operations. The Executive Farm Management can help you strengthen skills, grow that business, be innovative, be prepared, and focus on leadership and management tools and tactics that you may need going forward. If you want to learn more, please reach out, or just click on go.ncsu.edu/EFM and learn more about this program and this year's opportunity to join us for an in-depth and complex or exciting but very practical and useful program. Again, I'm Sharon Justice. I've enjoyed being with you today. If there's anything at all that I can do, I can be reached through Justice Leadership for more questions and help. So I hope you've had a great day. You can reach me at justiceleadership.com or at Sharon at justiceleadership.com. Thank you.